We are Kansas City's kind of one of the cool UX communities here, and we do monthly events on user experience, as well as a happy hour every month. If you are interested in joining up with us, we have a Slack group and an email list and lots of ways to keep in touch and just learn from one another. I'll hand it over to Angie to introduce us to TED.
All right, thanks, Dan. So I'm really excited to have Ted Gies here today. Ted and I actually met at a conference at MIT for folks interested in accessibility and library software. And we've kept in touch since then. Ted started out in accessibility for LexisNexis. So for those of you who don't know what that is high-level legal research software. And of course, there are a lot of disabled lawyers, and they tend to sue people if their stuff isn't accessible. But Ted has since moved on to be head of accessibility at Elsevier, which is a major publishing house in sciences and technology. And Ted's really one of the leading voices in accessibility and publishing. And I'm really excited that he's agreed to speak, and that I didn't have to do too much arm twisting to get him to agree. So thanks, Ted, and take it away.
Well, thank you, Angie, and thank you, Dan, for the nice intro. And how can I say no to Kansas City? I mean, when I think Kansas City, I think about visiting grandparents in the 80s and early 90s. My grandparents lived in Independence, Missouri for, I don't know, long time, 50 years. I don't know how long they lived there, but definitely a lot of fond memories of that area. And I myself was born in Jefferson City, so there you go. I won't tell you which year, but I am definitely Missouri roots, close by. So today, I'd like to just, talk with friends, really. If we get together and want to talk about UX and accessibility, yeah, anytime. It doesn't have to be a meetup. If you want to discuss some ideas, I'm happy to connect with you even after this. So I just want, we'll go through maybe a half hour or so of some slides and some ideas, and definitely want to connect with people, and we'll have a lot of time to just, ask questions and make comments and things. But I just want to start out with the idea that I think people know this. Accessibility is about people. And that's one of the reasons I've stuck with this and have kind of grown the accessibility program at Elsevier over the years is it's so people-centered, as is user-centered design and user experience. So this is just a picture of me. The first time I ever went to CSUN Accessibility Conference was about 10 or 11 years ago. And my friend Hadi Rangan, who's pictured here holding a travel cane, he happens to be visually impaired. And he said, we've been working on accessibility now for a while, open collaboration. He helped somebody who I really respect. Hadi helped me really understand some of the more technical details. He knew about ARIA. He was a screen reader user. And we made some really good strides in improving our main books and journals platform, Science Direct. So we presented our story at CSUN. And that was just one of those things where I was like, I liked accessibility before, and I kind of shared it with my UX day job. And I said, yeah, I'm kind of more vested in it. You see the people that rely on assistive technology. You see that there are scientists and researchers and other disciplines, people whose livelihood depends on accessibility. And I'm like, yeah, I really want to do more here. So, back in college, I went to Wright State University. They have a very esteemed accessible campus. I think they're like top 2. They're maybe, kind of like UIUC. They have a really great disability services office. And the picture that I'm showing here is a young man in a motorized wheelchair with a guide dog, and he's traversing the tunnel system under Wright State. And so when I was going to college, the tunnel system was just awesome for avoiding the cold winters. If it was rainy, you go to the tunnel system and you go between your classes. And it's just kind of one of those unique things that I just never really thought about accessibility back then. But then I come to learn that that's one of the key attributes that makes Wright State so accessible is, you can be in a wheelchair, or even I've seen people in like motorized beds, and they're showing up in these like really large lecture halls. I'm like, how did you get there? There's all these steps. And sure enough, the tunnel system and the elevators and everything makes it so that everybody's included, and side benefit, hey, everybody gets to avoid the rain. Everybody gets to, in some cases it's faster than just going through parking lots and the quad, as we called it. So, that's one of those things where you're like, oh, wow, they really designed a great accessibility feature that benefits everyone. So yeah, I mean, accessibility, it's about designing for people and some other stuff. So, this is a Venn diagram I created a long time ago, and it really shows that, to claim that accessibility, that you're going to practice it, maybe you put it on your resume. What are those disciplines that come together to really form the discipline of digital accessibility or physical accessibility, maybe in another kind of talk. But we talked about design for usability, user experience. That's one part of it. You have to know your accessibility standards. So WCAG 2.1, soon to be 2.2. You should know how to write some accessible HTML, how to wield the ARIA spec. And you should know how people generally use assistive technology like screen readers or voice input or screen magnification. So these things, like they kind of intersect to form this wonderful discipline. And if you kind of drill down into this bubble here, the standards, a lot of us know that the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which if you didn't know by now, those are the international standards. There's not a lot of diverging accessibility standards for the web. If you know WCAG, as some people call it, you're going to be well off in meeting most of the accessibility laws like 508 and the European Union's accessibility regulations. So the underlying principles: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. They form the POUR acronym. And if you really read the guidelines, you will figure out that, wow, these are about easy to use interfaces. It's not about some esoteric JavaScript command or some kind of very technical, hard to grasp concepts. It's really just good user experience. So here's just a few examples. So perceivable, one of the guidelines is about good color contrast for your text against background. I mean, who doesn't want that? So do you want a perceivable user interface with readable text, or do you want an interface with poor contrast and poor readability? Do you want your UX to be an operable user experience? So one of the WCAG criterion is about session timeouts. Now, I know myself, I was just literally today, I was just looking to see if we're going to go see Steve Martin and Martin Short, some comedy legends, pretty soon here in town this weekend. And I was just thinking to myself, like, yeah, when I order tickets for Steve Martin and Martin Short, if I'm like halfway through ordering my tickets, or let's just say, registering for a new service or something, how unpleasant is it when maybe you have to go take a break, go let the dog out, go, use the restroom, whatever it is? How disappointing is it when your session expires and you lose your place in line, or, the data that you entered is no longer available. So that's governed by the WCAG. You know, having a user-friendly way to avoid session timeouts, you know, a way to extend your session. I mean, is that accessibility? It's just good user experience for everybody, if you ask me. And then another example is like understandable. Um, when, you know, back to filling out forms online. If you're registering, putting in your name, your birthday, all of these different inputs, I myself like to know what are the rules. So if I have to, you know, if I have to use my country code and my phone number or don't, I want to know that. I want to know which fields are required. Doesn't matter if I have a disability or not. I just want all the form instructions there for me, and I want them labeled correctly. So, you know, again, this is a WCAG principle that's just good user experience. Now, I think when you get to the robust, you know, you start to get into some things that, you know, are a little bit more in tune with people using screen readers. But again, they're just good user experience. So, you know, when we see dynamic content displayed on a web page, like a confirmation message, sometimes that content isn't announced if you're a blind person. So you have to put in a little tag or something to make sure that's announced, maybe like an alert roll or something. But I mean, yeah, I mean, that's just good user experience. If you're the UX designer and you want to flash a message that you've given, you know, just to give users good feedback about an action that they just performed, maybe something was deleted, added, and saved. You want everybody to receive that message, not just people who can see. So again, just good UX, I think, is underpinning the whole web content accessibility guidelines. So I'm a big fan of the W3C's work there. And, you know, these these one-liners here: get your UX house in order. And I think I'm preaching to the choir here, but I've seen some bad examples. I'll talk about a couple. First of all, I'm not going to name the company, but there is a really large corporation that develops like human resources software. Basically, if you work, you know, if you're employed and you're looking to see what your benefits are, or maybe you're going to schedule some time off, maybe you want to see when, you know, how long you've been working. Typically, we have like a human resources portal. So a company that provides that software, my goodness, do they have a lot of accessibility people working for them now. I admire that, and they're doing some great things. But at the same time, I'm like, well, wait a minute. The UX for a lot of these screens is just, there's something missing. You know, it shouldn't take 5 clicks to what you could accomplish in maybe 1 or 2 clicks. You know, there's just some basic weirdness with the UX. And I would just say, like, for any people out there who are thinking like, okay, yeah, you know, let's do accessibility and bake it into our company culture, please do. Nothing's holding you back. Don't forget about your good user experience designers, because it's a very symbiotic thing. You can be compliant with the WCAG guidelines and still have an unusable product or user interface, unfortunately. And if you layer on bad accessibility on top of a bad UX, it's just not going to be a good outcome for anyone. In the physical space, here's just a weird example. This was taken from, I believe, I put the link in the notes, but in Scotland, there was a family who had a child in a wheelchair, and I believe they were on the 3rd floor, and so there was only steps to get up in and out of the apartment. So they needed an accessible approach, and I believe this was a civic issue where I think the city was required to accommodate this person. And it's like, okay, well, what's the requirement? Well, we need to accommodate somebody in a wheelchair, so we need a ramp. You know, ramps typically, or some kind of like elevator would meet the need. So so the city came up with this. This is a picture of, I don't know, that's got to be about a 60-meter wheelchair ramp with about 10 or so turns. So can you imagine trying to traverse this set of ramps? You know, maybe the elevation drop is, I don't know, what is it, about 10 feet at the most from the ground to the door? I wouldn't call this a usable approach. Maybe it's a compliant approach, but compliant doesn't equal usable. Just keep that in mind. So I do want to talk about, you know, some of the Elsevier things that we've done around accessibility, and there are accessible building blocks. I would advocate that, especially with companies that are producing lots of websites, lots of web applications, to develop a coherent design system. And you know, this is really going to help with a lot of great UX kind of things. So coming up with a common and consistent set of colors and familiar UI components, something that reflects your company's brand values. You know, some of them are things like empathy, efficiency, you know, whatever your brand values are. Having a design system, brand guidelines, UI component libraries. I think of all these things as kind of fitting together. And you know, Elsevier, we've, over the past now 7-ish years, I think we've gone down this path of developing and maintaining and maturing a design system. So maybe people have heard of the IBM Carbon design system. There's also the US Web design system. Believe it or not, I was, you know, just today, a developer was asking me a question. They were trying to fix a very old, inaccessible calendar widget, and you see this a lot with you know, some of the older era web applications. Calendars, you know, it's a pretty it's what I would call the composite UI widget. It's not just one thing. It's like a dialog window plus like a set of buttons, plus you've got like a lot of structured content. So it's really not just one thing. And you know, I'm not going to say it's difficult, but there are some precedents for good accessible calendar widgets. So even today I was like, okay, I'm going to go test out some of the ones that are out there on the web. I liked very much what the US Web Design System's done for their calendar, and even the W3C's got a really great example. But having accessible examples for designers and developers to choose from makes the job a lot easier. And it really reduces the numbers of accessibility mistakes that have to be retrofitted later on that are expensive. So here's just a couple little screenshots of things that we've got from our Elsevier's digital brand guidelines. And so we've got a palette of compliant colors. So let's just say there's 20 colors that are sanctioned for each of the colors. So like link blue, we provide like the hex value. You know, can you use the blue on a white background? Can you use it on a dark gray background? And for those different combinations, does it pass the WC3 or W3C's contrast requirements at each of the 3 main considerations? You know, regular size font, large size font, and then non-text content like icons. So, you know, we're continually revising this and maybe expanding it, but it's really, I've seen less and less examples of new products failing color contrast. We used to always get groups that want to use our company orange, which is kind of like a brighter orange, and you know, that fails every time with a white text or on a white background. So definitely will help teams save time. And then there's also a set of UI components. So hardly any web companies or kind of like digital content companies I've seen are satisfied with the out-of-box styling that you can do with HTML components. HTML components are always the best, most accessible way to design UIs. But designers are creative. We don't want to hold designers back. So when a specific combo box or checkbox comes up that needs to be coded from scratch, meaning not just out of the box inputs, then you have to really make sure you've got the correct markup. And some people might have heard of this ARIA. This is something, again, from the W3C. It's like an extension of HTML that makes your UI accessible with screen readers. Make sure that's correct. Make sure all the keyboard support is in there. And having those building blocks, those UI components accessible, extremely important. You can kind of demonstrate to teams that this can be done. You don't, if we've already got a working example, not everybody has to design it from scratch. And then finally, we're trying to build out some accessibility personas, and just to help create more empathy with developers and designers, just to talk about some of the considerations that someone with maybe low vision would face. And just as an example, I mean, I've been on a user test before, usability test, where somebody with low vision, they were using like Zoom text and like text input boxes that just by default show like a line and a label are bad. And I think that's a bad approach for all users, but for a low vision user, very difficult to try to figure out where to click on a form if all of the text inputs don't have like a full bounding box. It's a tricky thing if you're just going to try to get to, there's these like UX and UI design fads, if you will, and I think Android might be to blame for releasing that kind of style a few years back with the text input. Accessibility is a journey, not a destination. And I'm not going to claim that all of Elsevier's accessible, or all of Elsevier's websites and web content is accessible. I think every website I've ever looked at, even externally, everything's, partially accessible. 100% with 100% compliant, I've barely seen on the web. But you just, the big thing is, do you have that continuous improvement mindset? Can you show progress if your customers ask you for a VPAT? Okay, that's like an industry standard accessibility conformance report. Can you show that you haven't gotten worse or stayed the same? I think a lot of the customers we sell to in higher education, that's really what they're looking for. They just want to make sure we're working on it. Doesn't have to be perfect every time. I won't go through this slide in detail, and it's probably out of order. But at Elsevier, we've been at accessibility well over a decade, and it's not just a UX designer's responsibility, and it's not just following WCAG and making sure your UX house is in order. I mean, one day I just kind of did a brain dump of what are those things that really showed an evolution. Where did you start, and how did you get to where now we're growing our team and hiring more people in our accessibility team? It's a long journey. It did not happen overnight. And at the very top here, building awareness, especially if you are in a larger company and nobody's really talking about accessibility. Maybe you've got a UX program. Even if you have a UX program, you're going to have to do some very deliberate building of awareness. And we did that, I don't know, over 15 years ago. We started working on educational webinars. We have an accessibility guild with over 250 people on a Slack channel. And we even published like an internal journal on accessibility years ago. So it's really, it really does take quite a lot of work. Part of the problem is I don't think in software engineer, in computer science programs, even in UX programs, still don't think accessibility is like a required class or big part of programs in CS or UX. We might go back to this slide. Talk a little bit about tools. I mean, the digital brand guidelines are huge. Rely on those a lot. And we do use a lot of the free scanners out there, like Wave. Axe by DQ is a really good browser plugin. We're testing our websites with screen readers, 2 free ones that are great, NVDA for Windows, VoiceOver for iOS and OS X. And we also try to, as much as possible, test our products with people who experience disabilities. We're just getting to the point to where people are, dare I say, less scared to do this. I think the fear of the unknown sometimes holds people back with this. And I would strongly suggest that, before you start recruiting maybe people who use screen readers, who can't see the screen perhaps, make sure you've got the basics right. Make sure that you have an expert test it, because you'll be wasting your time otherwise. Unless you're trying to make the point that, hey, people, sanity check here. Nobody who's using a screen reader can actually do anything with our website. If you want to prove that, go for it. But if you're really trying to focus in on improving the user experience, making sure that people can more efficiently complete tasks and have success, I would say do some, fix the basics first. Just going to do a time check here. Okay, I'll just maybe do about 5 or 7 more minutes and then we can open it up with some discussion. So accessibility is also about collaboration. We have a central team of experts at Elsevier, but I kind of look at us as coaches and enablers. We're not actually, writing the UX and UI specs. We're, we've got a training program where we, manage that, and we we do these very detailed accessibility audits, and we do, again, a lot of coaching on how to do things. But we've also got what we call our Accessibility Champions program. I would say the company Intuit probably has the best champions program that I've come across. So that's Ted Drake, and you can just Google Intuit Accessibility Champions and you'll find some great articles. For us, we try to make sure that every product, every website has at least one champion in accessibility in each of these 4 roles. So from the business side, a product manager, a UX designer, an engineer or developer, and a quality assurance person. We try to make sure at least one of these people, we have at least one champion in each of these 4 roles, and they're all working together to make sure that accessibility sees the light of day, that it doesn't get forgotten about, that we're continually testing, especially new content and new websites. But you're not going to get very far if you're just trying to do this on your own. It takes a lot of collaboration to get it right. And a real world example for us. So we use HighCharts, which is a very commonly used web chart library. They're out of Norway. And I would say we use HighCharts graphs in maybe 7 or 8 of our websites, our enterprise stuff that we're selling to, higher education, government. And so you don't get a pass in accessibility if you say, oh, well, our site's good except for this chart that we license. You don't get a pass for that. So we wanted to make sure all of our charts were accessible. So I had sent a friendly email about 7 or 8 years ago to High Charts asking them if they ever wanted to work on accessibility. And so they sent me Oystein. He's my friend here shown in, so this is just like a screen grab of myself and Oystein at CSUN conference a couple years ago. We were just talking, doing like a short interview. Anyways, we have a nice collaboration with High Charts. And I think it was like less than a year of working with them, they actually released their very first accessibility module for their charts, which allows, like keyboard operation, screen readers can like actually hear the data points on all of the, on a graph and hear the X and Y ranges and, all kinds of interesting things that are described. And we haven't stopped that work. We're like, every year we try to do something new and interesting. So we actually just presented our work at CSUN in March. And, we've experimented with like, okay, voice input, like sonification, using tones to depict rises and falls in data. So, that's just an example. And we don't pay High Charts and they don't pay us for the accessibility work. We just kind of, this is very interesting. We're vested, so we enjoy that collaboration. But I would, suggest that if anybody out there has a similar thing where they're like, oh, well, we're heavily dependent upon this company for accessibility or for their components or their content, maybe you can spark a collaboration and you'd be surprised. Some people really want to work on this and get into it. Well, I don't know. I think that's probably enough talking for now. Maybe we can revisit some of the other things that we talked about, but maybe we can start having some questions. I haven't been monitoring chat, by the way.
Sure, and my internet is in and out, but I've got Angie and Lisa to back me up here if we need. But we did have someone share a really cool tool for developing contrast grids. And just bouncing off that, I'm curious if you have any kind of like, tools that you've relied on that you would recommend for people just getting into this.
Yeah, I think that Wave is really good, and I mean I can quickly show that. Let's see. Wave tool is so here's I mentioned Science Direct. That's one of our key platforms for books and journals. And so Wave is a free browser plugin. I think it's available for Firefox and Chrome. I'm running it in Chrome. And so you have Wave installed when you have that little W icon in your tools here. So when you click it, in a few seconds, it will kind of tag, like visually light up your web page. And green means good. Okay, red and yellow are kind of things you need to work on. So for this, the home page, if you look over here, this is where the report came into play. So 0 contrast errors, that's good. That's like I mentioned, poor contrast just being one of those good usability, good WCAG principles to follow. 0 alerts. So alerts are those things that you kind of typically have to manually inspect, and maybe they're violations of WCAG, maybe they're not. But then probably the most important thing is the number of errors. So there's one here, and I know exactly what it is. And this is me just kind of eating my own words from a second ago. Is like, okay, the one error is a dependency on a third-party company. It's not High Charts, it's another company. I'm not going to call them out. But we're working with them on trying to get that one little error fixed. And it's like a missing label for a button, basically, some licensed plugin. But maybe let's just I was trying to look at rental cars earlier. Let's just look at this randomly. It was in my browser. Let's look at Avis. I don't know. Let's click on Wave. Let's see what they're doing. Okay, so they've got some stuff to chew on. So they've got 33 errors on their homepage, 6 contrast errors, and 93 alerts. And so if you click into the details, this is where the good stuff is. So you see, okay, I got two missing alt texts. What does that mean? Oh, by the way, I love Wave because whenever there's something wrong, you can kind of see where it is on the screen. So look where the red icons are. Click on that. Oh, there's my missing form label. And then you could say, okay, where is it in the code? Click on the code. And if it kind of brings you right to the spot where your missing form label is. So that's good. That's really good. I like Wave. I would start. I think it's a good place to start. Yeah. Wave is freely available. Yes, it is. That's to Barbara's question.
And I see Angie has her hand raised. Go ahead, Angie.
You said that Intuit has a great accessibility team, but every year I use TurboTax to do my taxes because my mom buys it, and the software is terrible. The web interface is better, but if you buy the TurboTax program, it's terrible for visual impairment accessibility.
Okay, Angie, two things on that one.
Uh-huh.
One, TurboTax's Champions program is wonderful. And I would assume by virtue of the Champions program that their, accessibility would be good, but I've never tested their products. I have a high respect for their accessibility leader, who's another Ted Drake. But and as far as the fact that you say that they could be very much improved, I would love to connect you with them if you would want. I'm sure I could introduce you to their accessibility head, and they would take you seriously. I know.
Oh, please do.
Yeah.
But I just had to be petty and bring that up.
Yeah. And that, you know what, I'll just use that as a little bit of a tangent too. And that is, most of the things that we're producing in Elsevier are web applications. So, research software, things that even like a geologist might use to help find oil and gas, even like drug discovery and diagnosis, clinical diagnosis kind of web applications. Most of the things are websites. We do a little bit of mobile apps, on iOS and Android. And really, I can't think of really hardly, maybe just a couple of Windows applications. We have a very popular complete anatomy program for Windows. And so, what's interesting about some of these things are a lot of like the screen reader issues, the techniques and the markup for websites, I think is pretty straightforward and easy to comprehend. But if you're developing like an iOS app and you want to make sure all your components are screen reader friendly, it's just it's the same discipline. It's just different markup, and maybe, who knows, maybe Intuit has a very strong web accessibility initiative. I think, Angie, you might be saying it's like not very good for the Windows app. Maybe they don't have people working on the Windows. Maybe they're all web. I don't know, in terms of their team. We can find out. Looks like there's some good posting of resources in chat. Here, I'll show you. There's
within an organization, probably one of those perennial questions.
Oh, sorry, say that, I missed it.
How do you find and recruit champions within your organization?
There's a lot of different ways. With our program, we really try to go top down and bottom up with accessibility. So, keep in mind, Elsevier is about 9,000 people total, and we've had success hitting it from both sides. So right now, I'm trying to get our CTO to help kind of promote accessibility champions, and I guess you could call it a quota in a way. I mean, we're trying to fill every product with at least 4 champions, and part of being a champion isn't just like saying you're the champion. You're required to take a training program. So we've got some self-paced courses that we license, and people at their own pace can go and learn the basics. I think that's a big part of it, because especially if you've never really worked in accessibility, some of these concepts are going to be foreign to you. And yeah, I mean, the training is going to help everybody speak the same language. So I'd say, champions program and kind of some training, those things fit very tightly together. And we have, people talk about KPOs and OKRs and, objectives. I think whatever your company's framework is for objective setting, that's how you really get a lot of headway with things like champions, is to get buy-in for your champions program and have those fit into annual objectives for your staff.
Came up, how do you recruit people for?
Yeah, the recruiting. This has come up recently too in Elsevier. So we haven't relied upon external agencies for this. I would say that whoever is, leading your accessibility efforts, and if you have somebody who's, get an expert. If your company doesn't have someone who's focusing on this and developing it, I'd say that's number one. And then, over time, go to conferences and go to places like CSUN and meet people. We've gathered contacts over the years just from being in the business, and you can reach out to organizations like National Federation for the Blind and have them help. I mean, they're always, we ran a study a long time ago at National Federation for the Blind, and that was they didn't typically we offer honorarium, but we do that with all of our user studies. Local universities, the Disability Services Office is very helpful typically. If you say, hey, I'm trying to recruit for a study, you basically need to borrow an hour of someone's time, and we'll give them some Amazon gift card or some other honorarium. So that's another really good way to do it.
There's a follow-up to that too. Do you have any guidance on good language for recruitment?
Yeah, I mean, I would say don't be afraid of like offending someone with non-inclusive language, in that if you're well-intentioned, you might make a little mistake, whenever I'm talking about people who are visually impaired or people who are blind, I typically don't say a blind person, or I usually use people-centered language. I mean, but nobody's gonna like, I think don't let that dissuade you. Language, I would just say, what are you trying to do? You're trying to make your products more inclusive. You're trying to improve the usability for people with disabilities. So I just just use your best judgment. It's worse if you don't do anything, and then you're like, so the actions speak louder than the words.
Great. And we have one more question. Anybody who wants to jump in? Oh, we've actually got a hand raised. Angie, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I was just going to kind of back Ted up and also say, another approach to take is to look for people who use specific assistive and adaptive technology. I need to recruit screen reader users. I need to recruit magnification users. I need to recruit people who use alternative pointing devices and things like that. I would say that, so I personally use and prefer identity first language. I mean, when I'm the one speaking, I hope nobody is questioning my humanity. But if I'm speaking with the institutional voice, I do code switch to person first language. That is to say, person with a disability, user with a disability, etc.
Yeah. Another source of recruiting, I am a fan of the Digital Accessibility Center in Wales. And in the UK, they have here, I'll just post it into chat. This might be a good way to engage at a service level, an organization who really puts people with disabilities at the center of what they do. So this is this isn't like a really large corporation that's super profit driven. They are a collection. I think most of their workforce are people who experience disabilities, and they provide real assistive technology users to test and audit probably whatever digital content you have. So it's really, I like their mission, and I like what they do. So there are organizations out there kind of like this.
Another great question in the chat. Could you highlight accessibility shortcomings you see most often? Anything that would be like top of the list? Don't forget to ask this question or consider this issue.
Are we talking about in the context of running a user study?
I think generally in terms of design.
Oh, okay. Well, I think knowing that we're all designers, I would say be very, not cautious, but question design fads. You know what I'm saying? Like that to me is like the fads that come around that I'm seeing, because now I've been in the UX industry for like over 20 years or something like that. I see these kind of like digital content or UI du jour, like what, so like design patterns can be really anti-patterns for accessibility. Things like the infinite scroll. If you read a little bit about the infinite scroll, there were some articles going on about like how it's it can cause like depression with people and some other ill psychological kind of effects. And like just content, I've seen more like hero banner main page content where you just get some fundamental anti-patterns, things like moving or pulsating areas of the screen, some things where like I mentioned the low vision anti-pattern earlier, where you might just have like a lack of affordance for like a text input box, like, oh, it's just a line with a word on it, like what is that now? Is that really a text input box? Like, just thinking, I think using persona based thinking in looking at design alternatives is a really good tool. Looking at the lenses. So and there are people out there who are motion sensitive, and I again, be cautious with some of those things. There's WCAG guidelines on how to handle motion and auto updating information. I'm I'm a big fan of simplicity, and thinking about like, okay, whenever you see a user interface, what would this be like for a blind person? And thinking, after you've worked for a while in this in accessibility, you kind of learn to think it from the perspective of those different personas, blind, low vision, hearing impaired, people who maybe can't use the mouse. So I think like just, as a general rule, I would just say yeah, think in those, whenever you're doing design reviews, think in those different, from those different lenses, those different persona lenses, and use some of those new design patterns with caution.
I enjoy this topic so much. It's like so much about accessibility is just about good UX practice in general. And that's such a good reminder. We do have a few more minutes left. I'd love to see if anybody has any more questions, or Angie, if you have any good chime-ins as well.
I will definitely chime in to reinforce two of Ted's points, especially on the not following design trends. With universities, we see a lot of trends towards our web pages focusing on marketing rather than use by people who actually use the web page on a regular basis, students, faculty, and staff. And the marketing trends are very young people perceived centric and often do interfere with accessibility. And also a huge fan of just keep it simple. I think as designers, we know how to make things that are aesthetically pleasing. And we focus on that more than the fact that the primary purpose of a web page is to provide access to information, not to create great art. Does Ted want to disagree with anything I said, or?
No, I love that. It's just that, because I'm an art lover. I that's one of my hobbies, and I like to create aesthetically pleasing things. But it's kind of like, you don't want to be, accessibility doesn't want to have the reputation of the, the speed bump and we don't want to hold back creativity, right?
Exactly.
That's sometimes accessibility's gotten a bad reputation for that, which I don't think it's proper. I mean, pretty much no matter how you design your screen, I think there's a way to make it accessible. But it's knowing, like to your point, Angie, it's knowing when you've broken kind of like the meaningful flow of content. So just as an example, if you start overlapping text on top of each other, you know what I'm saying, like to where you're like making part of the text kind of unreadable, or it's like, oh, your entire web page is like filled with text in all caps, and you can't adjust the spacing. I mean, there's limit. I mean, yeah, there are limits to creativity, I guess, inherent in making it accessible. But I think you can still make it plenty beautiful. It's knowing when things break accessibility patterns. It's being able to kind of like know when you're going awry, or at least being able to like help people pump the brakes when things are about to go awry.
Oh yeah, I think it's very possible to make both accessible and beautiful content. But I do see designers too often get caught up in, well, like you said, the latest design fad.
This has been such a good conversation. I know we only have a couple minutes left. I'm going to throw in another pitch to join the UXPA Kansas City community. I'll throw a link in the chat and momentarily. But just want to say thanks to Ted, thanks to Angie for coordinating the. Sorry about that. My audio is cutting out a little bit. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to see if, Angie, do you want to give a little pitch for our accessibility event coming up in June?
Sure. So in June, we're trying to do something innovative with the Zoom call. So let's fingers crossed that this works well. But Dan Ireton and I are going to present on our methodology for play testing games for accessibility. And I think it's a great way to teach people about accessibility and about design thinking and accessibility. So we're using games, but it's really about accessibility. And it's really about how do you start thinking about accessibility and design.
Yeah, games are always a great way to introduce a new topic, because since it involves play, it kind of sets the stakes as lower and helps people be more open to ideas that might not otherwise occur with them. So yeah, it's going to be great.
It'll be so fun. I hope everybody does join us. We'll put a plug-in for that in our Slack channel, and we'll send out an email about it. So do join us. We'd love to see you, love to play with you. So once again, just a big Zoom round of applause for this event. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Angie.
Thank you very much. It was fun. Hopefully everybody has a great week.